Imagine this, you are standing in a frozen dawn, ankle deep in mud, staring across a narrow valley. On the other side are 25,000 French soldiers. Here, their armor glitters like silver under the morning light. Dukes, counts, barons, the proudest bloodlines in France, the richest knights in Europe. Here, they outnumber the English more than 4-1. They are rested, they are fed, they are fighting on their own soil, and in their minds, the battle is already over. Here, all they have to do is crush an exhausted enemy that can barely remain standing. Now look at the English line. Only 6,000 men. Most of them are longbowmen. Yeah. Peasants with muddy boots, rough hands, and sharpened wooden stakes. Many are sick, many are starving. Some have not slept properly for days. Yeah. Their king, Henry V, is weakened by fever. His army is trapped far from home, and across the field, French nobles are already discussing who will capture which English lord. Yeah. To the French, this is not a battle, it is an execution. A starving army is about to be erased, but then the field changes everything. By sunset, here, nearly 10,000 Frenchmen will lie dead in the mud. Among them will be some of the most powerful nobles in Europe. The English will lose perhaps 400 men. Here, think about that for a moment. How did a starving army destroy the finest knights of France? How did one exhausted English soldier survive what 25 armored French knights could not? Here, something on that battlefield swallowed men whole. Even full-plate armor could not save them. Longbowmen fired so many arrows that the sky seemed to turn black. Yeah. And Henry used a tactic that looked like madness. He wanted the French to charge. He needed them to believe they were walking into victory. Yeah. Because hidden inside that muddy valley was a weapon the French did not understand. The French thought they were charging at peasants. They were charging into a trap. Yeah. So why did France walk straight into the deadliest choke point of the century? By the end of this video, you will know exactly how it happened. Yeah. Leave your comment as tribute. Like and subscribe. This is Agincourt, the battlefield where 6,000 broken soldiers destroyed the pride of France and forged the legend of a king. Yeah. But why did this battle happen at all? To understand how an English army outnumbered 4-1 crushed the elite of France, we have to go back. Yeah. For decades, England and France had been locked in a brutal struggle over crowns, land, bloodlines, and royal claims. Today we call it the 100 Years' War. Yeah. But in 1415, this was not supposed to become a major English campaign. England was weak, plague had drained the country, political coups had shaken the throne. Yeah. Kings had emptied their treasuries. Who would dare invade France under those conditions? Only one man. Henry Young, focused, coldly determined. Yeah, and obsessed with restoring English honor. He needed a victory. He needed it quickly, so he did the unthinkable. He carried the war back into France. Yeah. In August 1415, Henry crossed the Channel and invaded his army, captured the port city of Harfleur. But victory came at a horrifying price. Disease ripped through the English ranks. Yeah. Food supplies disappeared, men collapsed in the mud, hundreds died from dysentery. By October, Henry's campaign was falling apart. The only rational choice was retreat. Yeah. But France had no intention of letting him escape. The French assembled a massive army. 10,000 knights stood ready. Armored nobles, trained for brutal hand-to-hand combat. Yeah. 4,000 mounted horsemen waited on the wings. Fast riders built for shock attacks and crushing charges. 6,000 heavy men-at-arms formed behind them. Yeah. Veterans carrying swords, poleaxes, and maces. 2,000 crossbowmen joined the force. Another 3,000 archers and levies filled the rear. Altogether, 25,000 warriors gathered to erase the English in one overwhelming blow. But this was more than defense. France wanted revenge for Crécy, for Poitiers, for 70 years of humiliation. Henry began marching toward Calais, the nearest English stronghold, but the French raced ahead of him. They blocked his path. They did not see themselves as stopping an army. They saw themselves as hunting a cornered king. Then came October 24th, the night before the battle. Rain pounded the fields around Agincourt. The ground softened, the clay thickened, the mud became glue. English soldiers shivered beneath soaked tents. Others slept in the open, drenched by rain. There was no food, no warmth, no comfort. Across the valley, the French camp was alive with celebration. Nobles feasted on wine, bread, and roasted meat. They sang, they laughed, they spoke as if victory had already been delivered to them. Yeah. Some polished their armor for the glorious parade they expected the next morning. Henry gathered his captains. He knew what waited for them at dawn. Yeah. He told them they might die the next day, but if death came, they would meet it fighting. The English camp fell into silence. No songs, no boasting, no celebration, only rain. And far away the sound of French laughter. Then dawn came. The battlefield revealed itself. Henry formed his men into one narrow line. Yeah. Not because this was the perfect plan, but because the land gave him no other choice. His 6,000 men stood between two dense forests. The space between them formed a narrow corridor. Yeah. Only a few hundred men could advance through it. At once, it was a natural bottleneck, a killing ground. It was the one place where French numbers could not surround him. Yeah. They could only come straight forward. English longbowmen drove wooden stakes into the mud. They angled them outward like the teeth of some crude beast. Yeah. Across the valley, the French army deployed like a rising tide of iron. The front line held 10,000 dismounted knights. They had been forced off their horses by the deep mud and cramped terrain. Yeah. The second line held 6,000 men-at-arms, deep ranks of armoured fighters pushing behind the nobles. On the flanks waited 4,000 cavalry, 2,000 on each side. Yeah. Their mission was simple: crush the English longbowmen. In the rear stood 2,000 crossbowmen and 3,000 archers. A human wall filled the valley. Yeah. Bodies and iron turned the field into a funnel. The two armies stared at each other, and nothing happened. The French expected the English to wait, to weaken, to starve, to die where they stood. Henry knew waiting meant death, so he made a move no one expected. Banners forward, the English line advanced. Yeah. Longbowmen pulled their sharpened stakes from the ground. They moved several dozen paces closer to the French. Then they hammered the stakes back into the mud, for it was an insult. A challenge, a message the French could not ignore. French units began scrambling to reorganize. Horses snorted and slipped in the heavy clay. Yeah. Then Henry unleashed his second surprise. Archers hidden in the woods, 200 longbowmen opened fire from the tree line. Arrows suddenly tore into shields. Yeah. Horses and armor. Their hunting calls echoed through the trees. They mocked the nobles they were killing. French pride broke. Somewhere in the front ranks, a voice screamed, "Charge!" The French tidal wave began to move. On both wings, 2,000 mounted nobles surged forward first. Hooves sank deep into the mud. Horses slipped and staggered. Riders fought to remain upright as the ground dragged at their mounts. Still, they forced the charge onward. They tried to swing around the English line. They tried to crush the longbowmen on the flanks, but they galloped straight into a storm of arrows. Visors were struck. War horses fell mid-stride. Panicked riders crashed backward into their own infantry. The second French line fell into confusion before it had even reached the fight. The cavalry that was supposed to win the flanks collapsed within minutes. Now the French front line began its advance. 10,000 dismounted knights pushed toward the English stakes. They marched under relentless arrow fire. The arrows often failed to punch through plate armor, but they found weak points. They shattered joints. They cut tendons. They struck throats. They crushed windpipes. By the time the knights reached the stakes, many were already wounded. Still, their weight slammed into the English line, and that was when the trap closed. English men-at-arms braced behind the stakes. They struck downward at knights trapped in front of them. The longbowmen kept firing from behind and along the sides. Volley after volley crashed into the French ranks. The nobles stumbled forward. The men behind them shoved them deeper. Their French plate armor had become a prison. English mail and leather gave Henry's men freedom to move. Then the second French wave arrived. 6,000 heavy men-at-arms crashed into the rear of their own knights. They did not strengthen the attack. They buried it. The French were crushing themselves. Henry saw it happening. He told his captains to hold. Let them come, and still they came, blind, helpless, sinking deeper with every step. Only then did the longbowmen drop their bows. They grabbed axes, mallets, knives. They rushed in from the flanks. They were light enough to move through the mud. The armored French could barely turn to face them. Here, the valley became a grinder, knights fell, men suffocated under bodies, some drowned face down in the mud, and in the middle of the chaos, Henry fought in the front ranks. Here, at the rear, the final 5,000 French troops watched the disaster unfold. Crossbowmen, archers, levies. They saw nobles die in piles. They saw the pride of France trapped and butchered. Here, should they advance? Should they retreat? They froze. They had never seen their own aristocracy destroyed like this. Then the French collapse began. Here, those who could still stand staggered backward. Those who could not were swallowed by armor, bodies, and mud. The third French line looked at the field before them. Here, they saw death waiting in the choke point, and they chose not to enter it. They withdrew without striking a blow. By early afternoon, the battlefield was silent. Here, the mud was filled with dead and dying men. Around 10,000 French soldiers were dead. The English had lost perhaps 400, a 25-to-1 ratio that defied the logic of medieval warfare. Here, Agincourt did not merely break a French army, it turned the English longbow into the terror weapon of its age. It shattered the confidence of a kingdom. Here, it proved that discipline, terrain, mud, and English steel could humble the richest nobles in Europe. And at the center of it all stood Henry V. Here, young, feverish, unyielding, a king forged in mud, a king who changed the course of the 100 Years' War. If you enjoyed this story, watch this video next.